Aang versus Korra. This is the ultimate battle of the avatars, and today, I'm going to show you why this fight is much closer than you think. Aang was just a fun-loving 12-year-old and an airbending master when he was told that he was the Avatar, destined to master all the four elements and bring balance to the world. And because of that, a whole lot of pressure. And because that's a whole lot of pressure to put on a 12-year-old, Aang ran away from his responsibilities and ended up getting frozen in ice for the next 100 years, all while the Fire Nation waged war against the rest of the world. When Aang woke up, he learned that he was the last airbender, so he set out with his new friends to master the four elements and bring balance to the world. The first thing we're going to take a look at is Aang's mastery over airbending. Like we said, Aang became an airmaster when he was just 12 years old, the youngest airbending master in history. He even invented his very own airbending technique, the air scooter, that quickly became one of the greatest airbending inventions ever, since it's so versatile and useful. And again, Aang was just a kid. And since airbending is the Avatar's natural element, and he's so skilled with it, it's usually the element that Aang uses the most in a fight. He'll usually throw powerful air blasts around, knocking enemies off their feet or destroying things around him, even massive metal doors or things like that. Now, Aang could go all out of his airbending, and he would be a deadly and dangerous fighter. But his pacifist nature means that Aang is usually just airbending for defense or evasion. And airbending definitely does greatly increase his speed and agility. Aang is constantly able to dodge and evade most any attacks that come his way, even attacks from other incredibly skilled benders. And most of the time, Aang makes it look easy. All this really showed up when Aang literally took on a volcano and won, one of the greatest airbending feats ever. The Makapu volcano exploded, and Aang had to use just airbending to stop the flow of lava, cooling it all to rock and forming a gigantic stone wall around the town. When it comes to the world of Avatar and airbending, this is definitely one of the most powerful and impressive feats you're ever gonna see. Now, while Aang originally showed some impressive skill with waterbending, you could almost call him a prodigy. It's actually one of his least used forms of bending. See, water isn't usually just lying around, and so Aang prefers to do airbending or earthbending. But still, Aang is able to throw massive water blast around at will, even using it to knock over Combustion Man, or even throw a massive water blast at Fire Lord Ozai while he was under Sozin's comet, overpowering Ozai and pushing him on the defense. Next up is earthbending, and because this directly contrasted with Aang's personality and his native element, he actually had a really hard time learning and mastering earthbending. See, airbenders relied a lot more on indirect attacks and dodging and evading, while earthbending required a much more direct and head-on approach. However, when Aang was forced to protect Sokka from a saber-toothed moose lion, he had to learn to stand his ground, showing that he could be a true earthbender. From there, Aang learned how to earthbend pretty easily, was able to use air, water, and earthbending all at the same time while in a fight. Earthbending even became Aang's second go-to form of bending after airbending. Because Aang is a pacifist, his earthbending tends to look a little different and is much more defensive, manipulating the earth in order to create walls or cages in order to restrain his enemies rather than outright hurting them. But still, he's able to regularly kick around massive chunks of the earth, send huge columns of rock flying around. He's able to take out whole commands of guards with just one attack and one slam on the ground. Aang definitely isn't fooling around when it comes to earthbending, even if he is a pacifist. And if you really want to see just how powerful Aang's earthbending is, Well, just take a look at his fight against General Old Iron. It's a massive, giant spirit with the ability to manipulate iron and the power to crush whole towns. So what's Aang do? Well, he earthbends in order to create a massive giant rock body himself. Then they had a giant kaiju fight against each other. Crazy impressive on Aang's part, some of the best earthbending that you'll ever see. But despite all that, Toph still thinks that Aang can use a little bit of improvement with his earthbending skills. Now, while normally the Avatar has to learn the elements in the proper cycle, for Aang it would be air, water, earth, and then fire, Aang was actually able to learn firebending early on from Master Zhang. However, it didn't go according to plan, and Aang grew impatient, accidentally hurting Katara in the process. And so Aang swore from that point on that he would never ever firebend again, all out of fear of losing control. However, it's kinda hard to be the Avatar and master all 4 elements if you just straight up refuse to master one of the elements. Aang would have to master firebending. And so, after him and Zuko traveled to meet the dragons and learn the true meaning of firebending, Aang was no longer scared of firebending, became very powerful with it. Aang mastered the ancient dancing dragon form, breathing fire and shooting fire from both of your hands, was able to unleash powerful fire blasting kicks that took down Fire Nation airships. Aang was even able to learn lightning redirection, a highly advanced form of firebending that Uncle Iroh created by observing waterbenders. But lastly, before Aang took on Fire Lord Ozai, well, he visited the massive lion turtle. The lion turtle granted him the power of energy bending. Energy bending is easily the rarest and most powerful form of bending. It's where the bender is actually able to bend and control the energy within their body. It's also incredibly dangerous. If your energy isn't pure and unbendable, well then you'll be destroyed. But since Aang's spirit was unbendable, well, he was able to energy bend and actually managed to remove Fire Lord Ozai's bending ability straight up. And lastly, because Aang is the Avatar and is meant to serve as the bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world, well, he can enter into the Avatar state. This means a few things. For starters, Aang is able to connect with his past lives in order to ask them for guidance and advice. That usually comes in the form of Avatar Roku. Also, while in the Avatar state, Aang becomes exceptionally more powerful. Like when he merged with the Ocean Spirit, basically became a giant water monster that was able to wipe out the entire Fire Nation Navy. Things like that, incredibly more powerful than he is normally. Or when he fought against Fire Lord Ozai. Now, for most of the fight, Aang was fighting against him just on his own. That was a pretty tough fight. Ozai is arguably the best firebender in history, and he was under Sozin's comet, meaning that he was exceptionally more powerful. But then when Aang entered the Avatar state and actually mastered it, that turned the fight pretty quickly. He started flying around with his spear made up of all the 4 elements, and Fire Lord Ozai is absolutely no match for him. Aang is so much more powerful than him now, and Aang straight up nearly killed him before he left the Avatar state, decided to spare his life, just to remove his bending powers instead. But Korra is the Avatar too, and that means she can do quite literally all the same stuff. At just 4 years old, Korra became one of the youngest Avatars able to bend 3 of the 4 elements. Trained in her abilities from a young age, Korra first set out to Republic City to master the 4th element, air. She always excelled in the physical side of being the Avatar. Korra is a bending prodigy, but she initially lacked in the spiritual side of being the Avatar, constantly having to grow and evolve over the years. Her journey saw her defeat the Equalist movement and end the civil war between the water tribes. And during that time, well, she lost and regained her bending powers, rediscovered her ancient connection with Rava, the Avatar spirit, and lost and regained her connection to her past lives. So Korra has definitely earned her place as an Avatar who changed the world. Korra is a waterbender at her core, and she was trained by Katara for over a decade, molding her into one of the most powerful waterbenders of all time. While she was taught both the northern and southern style of waterbending, which both employ big, fluid motions, Korra actually quickly switched over to Republic City's more aggressive, straightforward waterbending style. She's capable of creating large walls of ice, powerful water whips, and massive waves of water strong enough to push back and overpower enormous giant robots that can stand over 25 stories tall. She's also a powerful earthbender too, having mastered it since a young age. It's actually the first Avatar to show off that she can metal bend, which just further proves just how skilled of an earthbender Korra is. While she was originally trained in the more traditional form of earthbending, Korra actually picked up the pro style of earthbending pretty quickly too. It's similar to firebending, focusing on light footwork and fast jabs in a fight. And just like with earth and waterbending, Korra was also able to show off firebending from a young age, and mostly due to the fact that Korra tends to resort to offensive attacks when pressured, she'll actually use firebending a lot when in a fight, which is funny. Most of the time, avatars have a really hard time learning the opposite of their native element. But for Korra, well, despite being a waterbender, firebending has actually become second nature to her. This is probably because of her assertiveness, determination, and her fiery spirit. Unlike the other three elements though, airbending didn't come naturally to Korra, because while she is a waterbender, airbending is actually the bending form that's most opposite to her personality. And because of that, even though Korra is a powerful airbender, her style of airbending is actually drastically different from most other airbenders. She's way more straightforward and on the offensive, actually acting more like a firebender, instead of the more typical circular and spiral moves. However, she still understands and has mastered the traditional form of airbending too. She's even able to create an air scooter in order to move around or even create bubbles of air. And because of her skill and the fact that air is just all around us, it's become Korra's second most used element in a fight. Now let's break this fight down a little bit here. When it comes to physical abilities, which honestly we haven't really talked about all that much, well, it goes to Korra. Easy. Physicality and her strength, speed, and durability is actually a big part of Korra's character, as what a lot of her bending is built around, meaning she can dish out some powerful attacks and take a lot of attacks in return, and act like she doesn't even feel it. Basically, Aang is a light fighter. Korra is more of a heavy fighter. Korra can take a lot of hits, just brush it off. And while Aang won't get hit often, when he does get hit, well, he gets hurt. With earthbending, Korra should be able to absolutely dominate Aang, and he always struggled with earthbending to some degree, but not Korra. On top of that, she's got metal bending to work with, and she consistently used her earthbending in much more powerful and devastating ways. Aang typically used earthbending more for defense because of his pacifist nature, not Korra. Same with firebending and waterbending. Korra should be better in both of these than Aang too. Aang should definitely be able to hold his own, but fire quickly became Korra's go-to element. She used it a whole lot more than Aang, with a whole lot more power behind it too. Aang was a good firebender, but Korra is a better one. And with water, well, Korra didn't use it as much as you'd think a waterbender would, but when she did, it was devastating. Like we said earlier, Korra created a massive multi-story tidal wave in order to defeat a massive multi-story giant robot. The only bending form that Aang is undeniably better in is air. Korra preferred to use airbending in just a simple, straightforward way. Aang was much more creative, much more versatile, was a true airbending master at just 12 years old. He's always going to be a better airbender, but Korra takes the edge with the other three. And because of those reasons, Korra should be able to dominate a fight against Aang. Yeah, I know, it surprised me too, but gotta give credit where credit is due. Korra appears to be the better and more powerful bender, and she would beat Aang in a bending fight. And she's actually got the track record to prove it too. Korra managed to beat the first Dark Avatar, the only being ever as powerful as the Avatar, and Korra actually fought and beat him. But then it's all flipped on its head if we give both of them access to the Avatar state. Because while Korra is able to get into the Avatar state, and she becomes a lot more powerful than she was before, when Aang gets into it, well, the kid basically becomes a god. His Avatar state is definitely more powerful than anything we've seen from Korra, and while Korra might have better control over the Avatar state, you can't argue with Aang's pure power. So, pure bending, Korra wins. Avatar state, Aang wins. So it's like I said at the beginning, this fight is much closer than you'd originally think. But what do y'all think? Sound off in the comments down below. I know you're gonna have thoughts and feelings on this one for sure. If you stuck around this long and made it to the end of the video, that's amazing. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting us. And if you want to go subscribe, well, go subscribe. You're gonna see more videos like this one every single week. I'll see y'all then. I'll see y'all next time.